Listen carefully. What I'm about to tell you was never meant for your ears. It was whispered once on the frontier of Texas in the year 1867, and then buried beneath silence. But silence has a way of leaking, of bleeding through walls, through graves, through centuries. Tonight, you will hear it, and once you do, you will never be able to unhear it. A child was born carrying not just her own fragile life, but another heartbeat inside her. Two rhythms, two wills bound in one trembling frame, and those who dared to witness it left only one line, a note written in a shaking hand before it was hidden away. 2 hearts, 1 cradle. You must understand, the frontier was not a place of mercy. It was a land of dust, superstition, hunger, and silence. Men returned from the Civil War broken, or they never returned at all. Women carried the weight of survival with clenched jaws and hollow eyes. Children were born in cabins with their first cry muffled by fear, for death often waited just outside the door. And yet, nothing in that brutal land was as unnatural, as forbidden, as what happened in a lonely wooden house near Red Creek. The midwife who delivered her, a woman seasoned by countless births, was hardened against shock. She had seen stillborns stiff and blue, children twisted by bone sickness, infants gasping with lungs too weak to draw air. But what she encountered that night defied all categories. As she held the newborn against her breast, wiping blood from fragile lips, she felt a tremor beneath the ribs. She pressed her ear to the child's chest, and she froze. There it was, one rhythm, quick, thin, desperate, and then another, slower, heavier, dragging like the beat of something deep underground. 2 hearts in one body, 2 pulses at war inside a single frame of flesh. Imagine her terror, imagine the silence of that cabin, the lamp burning low, the parents erring not with joy, but with dread, and the midwife's hands trembling so badly she nearly dropped the child. She wrote nothing in the parish records, nothing in the census. She spoke no word of it to priest or doctor. She only scratched those 4 words, 2 hearts, 1 cradle, into a loose page and folded it into the back of a Bible before dawn. That was her testimony. That was her warning. And then she left, paid in silence, and the family sealed their door against the world. From that moment, the child, Clara, was condemned to live not as a daughter, not as a citizen, not even as a name upon paper, but as an erasure. No baptism was recorded. No census taker counted her. No neighbor dared to speak of her. She became a ghost while she still breathed. And perhaps that was safer, for what she carried inside her was not meant for daylight. Do you feel the weight of this? You must. Because this story is not only about a child born with a hidden twin, some medical curiosity buried under time. No, this is about the way institutions, church, state, family itself, will erase what they cannot explain. It is about the way truth, when it is too disturbing, is not debated but buried. This is the pattern, repeated across centuries, the suppression of knowledge that could shatter the illusions men are taught to cling to. Clara was not simply a child born strange, she was a mirror showing us how power operates. What cannot be controlled must be concealed, what cannot be justified must be silenced. The house on Red Creek became her prison. The shutters were nailed shut against the sun. The mother, pale as parchment, rarely left its walls. The father's face, neighbors said, grew harder with every passing year, as if the burden of secrecy calcified his very bones. And Clara, she grew, but she did not grow like other children. Her abdomen swelled and rippled as though something pressed outward from inside. Neighbors who glimpsed her whispered of faint cries that seemed to double, one atop the other, the sound of 2 voices where only one should have been. They said her cradle sometimes rocked on its own, shifting in the dead of night with no hand upon it. This was not a deformity. It was not a defect. It was a message. A reminder that life is stranger, darker, and far more layered than the stories we are told by priests and doctors and governments. But men fear what they cannot place in categories, and so Clara's existence was omitted. She was denied the ink that would have given her permanence. She was made invisible. That is how control works, not only by force, but by silence, by turning a living child into a blank space in the record. And yet, the silence never holds. It never holds. For fragments always escape. The note in the Bible, the whispers of the midwife, the flicker of rumor among neighbors who swore they saw the child's belly twitch as if a second life stirred within. These fragments, scattered and incomplete, reach us now. And when we gather them, when we dare to look at them without flinching, a darker pattern begins to emerge. Because Clara Ara's case was not unique. Across history, across cultures, there are accounts, erased, forbidden, half-whispered, of children born carrying another within them. Not merely twins, not merely deformities, but vessels, hosts, lives that defy the neat division of one body, one soul, lives that unsettle the entire architecture of how we understand humanity. And every time these cases surface, they are smothered, records vanish, families hide. The instinct sound. Institutions, religious, medical, governmental, conspire, silently or not, to ensure the story never survives in daylight. Ask yourself, why? Why erase them if they were merely accidents of nature? Why silence witnesses if nothing more sinister lay within? Perhaps because such children are not accidents at all. Perhaps they are reminders of something ancient, something we were never meant to remember. That within us lies not one heartbeat, not one will, but two. That man is never singular, never whole, but always divided, and sometimes that division takes form in flesh. The story of Clara Ara M. is not just the story of a girl in Texas, it is the story of suppression, of the war between truth and silence. Tonight, we tear back the silence. Tonight, you will see how far the rabbit hole goes, but beware, once you hear this, you cannot return. Some houses are not built for living, they are built for hiding, they are built for silence, and the house on Red Creek was one of them. It stood alone, a crude wooden structure nailed together from war-worn planks, its roof sagging under neglect. To the east lay brittle fields and a line of oaks, to the west nothing but scrubland and cattle trails. A shallow creek curled behind it like a moat, flooding in the spring to cut the family off from the world. No road touched its door, no neighbors came uninvited. It was as though the place had been chosen not for survival, but for exile. To step onto its porch was to step into a conspiracy. The shutters were always drawn, even in the sweltering Texas summer. The windows were small, set high, designed less for light than for watching who approached. Inside, the rooms were bare, two narrow chambers divided by rough boards, a low attic pressed beneath the sagging roof. It was not a home in the ordinary sense. It was a vault, a container built to keep one's secrets sealed inside. The neighbors noticed. They noticed because the family seemed to prefer absence over presence. They rarely came to town. They avoided gatherings, baptisms, markets, celebrations. They spoke little when forced to trade. Their eyes, when they lifted at all, carried the look of people who had seen something they could never name aloud. And when whispers did arise, that there was a child in that house, a girl who never came into the daylight, those whispers were met not with denial but with silence. Silence is the strongest confirmation of all. Understand this. In a place where community was survival, isolation was death. Families clung to each other because to stand alone on the frontier was to invite ruin. And yet, the family of Clara stood apart by choice. They built distance into their lives the way others built fences. They let the land itself do the work of concealment, and concealment is never innocent. It is always deliberate. Think about what that means. A child who was never brought to baptism, a child who never appeared on census records, a child who never played in the fields, never ran among other children, never existed outside of the house that contained her. Why? Because to allow the world even a glimpse would be to risk exposure, to risk a neighbor seeing her abdomen shift like something alive beneath the skin, to risk another midwife hearing the double pulse that beat within her chest, to risk the truth spreading beyond control. The house became a coffin of secrecy, and Clara Ara became its prisoner. Her cries were muffled by the walls, her presence was erased by omission, and yet, houses remember. They carry the weight of what they contain. Those who passed by said the air around that house felt heavier, as though silence itself pressed outward, thick and oppressive. Travelers avoided it. Neighbors glanced away when its sagging roof appeared on the horizon. It became a place you did not mention aloud. But silence is never just silence. It is a weapon. It is how power maintains control. When a family refuses to acknowledge a child, when a church refuses to write a name in its baptismal book, when a government refuses to count her in its census, what they are doing is more than a mission. They are erasing reality. They are declaring, this child does not exist, therefore her truth does not exist. And what is more terrifying, that she was hidden because she was weak, or because she was too strong. You see, the architecture of concealment is never accidental. The walls, the distance, the silence, all of it was a system designed to keep not only Clara contained, but to keep the rest of the world uncorrupted by what she represented. Because a child with two hearts is not simply a medical anomaly. It is a challenge to the entire order of things. One body, one soul. That is what the church taught. One citizen, one record. That is what the state demanded. But Clara broke that law the moment she breathed. She was two in one, and two in one was heresy. So they smothered her, not with hands, but with silence. They erased her from the ledgers. They denied her the font of baptism. They built their lives around the refusal to let her be seen. And in doing so, they revealed something profound, that institutions fear the exceptions more than the rules. The rules they can explain, enforce, control. But the exception cracks the foundation. The exception whispers to every man who hears it. The order you live under is not natural. It is manufactured. That is why Clara's story matters. Not because it is tragic, though it is. Not because it is eerie, though it is that as well. It matters because it shows how far power will go to keep anomalies hidden. A child with two hearts is more dangerous than a criminal, more dangerous than an enemy soldier, because she proves that the rules are not absolute. She proves that other possibilities exist, and once a man begins to see possibilities outside the order, he can never be controlled again. The house on Red Creek was more than a home. It was a tomb of knowledge. Every plank nailed down was an act of denial. Every shutter closed was a prayer for secrecy. Every silence was a scream buried beneath wood and dust. And though the family thought they had locked the secret away, secrets do not die in silence. They ferment, they grow, they twist inside the walls like roots breaking stone. And perhaps that is why, years later, when witnesses did speak, they did not only describe a hidden girl, they described a presence. They swore the cradle rocked on its own. They swore they heard two cries at once. They swore that the child's body seemed to ripple, as though something beneath the skin was struggling for release. And they swore that the air around the house felt different, thick, heavy, unnatural, like the silence itself had become alive. That is the nature of buried truth. You can cover it, you can erase the records, you can nail the shutters shut, but the secret still breathes. It breathes in the walls, it breathes in the silence, it breathes in the land itself. Clara was not erased. She was transformed into a myth, into a ghost, into a fragment of forbidden history that reaches us even now. And by listening to it, by letting these words reach your ears, you are already complicit in breaking the silence they worked so hard to preserve. You feel it, don't you? That pull, that descent. We are only at the beginning. The house was the first prison, but the true prison was much larger, and it was not made of wood and nails. It was made of ink and paper and silence, and it is still with us today. Ink is a cage. Do not mistake the fragile line of a pen for something innocent. Ink is how the world decides what is real and what is forgotten. And for Clara, ink became her executioner long before the grave. The midwife's trembling note, 2 hearts, 1 cradle, was never entered into any parish record. It was never spoken to the priest, never whispered to the doctor. Instead, it was folded into a family Bible, tucked between browned pages like a stain too dangerous to be seen. That was the first act of erasure. And then the institutions, the church, the state, the very mechanisms designed to preserve life on paper, followed with silence. In 1870, the census men came. They rode into counties like clockwork, carrying ledgers bound in leather, columns waiting to be filled with names, ages, households. They recorded fathers, mothers, surviving kin. They counted every child born after the war, no matter how weak, no matter how fragile. But when they reached the house on Red Creek, there was no Clara, Her parents were noted, their other kin, written down with ink that survives even now. But not her. She was not counted among the breathing. She was a shadow in the house, erased with the flick of a pen by men who never even saw her face. Do you understand the violence of omission? To be unrecorded in 19th century Texas was to be declared invisible. Without baptism, you were denied entry into the kingdom of heaven. Without census entry, you were denied recognition in the ledger of the living. You were a ghost made of flesh. The church's silence was even sharper. In the parish book, baptisms were the most enduring ritual of memory. Infants were carried to the font within weeks of their first cry, their names inked in careful black by priests who knew these books would outlast them. The parish book was eternal life on paper, but Clara Ara never touched the font. Her name was never written, not because of oversight, not because of neglect. The book shows no gaps, no missing lines, no errors. It was choice, a deliberate refusal. Why? Because baptism was not only a blessing, it was exposure. To bring Clara to the church, to let her cries echo beneath the crucifix, to let the priest place his hand upon her chest and feel not one heartbeat but two. Such an act would have shattered the silence her family had sworn to keep. The parish chose protection over truth. To write her down was to make her undeniable. To leave her blank was to make her vanish. This is how power works, not only by punishing those who speak, but by rewarding those who stay silent. The census takers did not pry. The priest did not demand. They looked away because looking too closely meant confrontation. And confrontation is dangerous. It asks questions that have no safe answers. It exposes cracks in the system, cracks that might spread until the whole illusion collapses. Think carefully. How many other names were left unwritten? How many other children vanished not by death but by silence? Clara is a symbol, yes, but she is also a question aimed directly at you. What truths in your own life, in your own history, were erased before you ever had a chance to know them? How much of what you believe about your world is simply what was allowed to remain on the page, while the inconvenient, the disturbing, the unexplainable was scratched out, omitted, denied? This is not history. This is control. When the census erases you, when the church refuses you, when your name is denied a line of ink, you are not only forgotten, you are unmade. You become a ghost. And ghosts, though unrecognized, never rest. They move through whispers, through fragments, through unease. They move through the cracks of official memory. Clara Ara's life was confined to silence, yet it survived in rumor, because silence itself could not contain the weight of two hearts. Neighbors remembered. They remembered the way her mother kept her swaddled so tightly that nothing but her face could be seen. They remembered how her belly seemed to shift as if something moved within. They remembered faint cries overlapping, rising from the cradle in unnatural harmony. These memories never entered the census, never entered the parish book, but they outlasted the ink. They slipped free of the record, carried on tongues and fears, and when we put them beside the silence, the pattern becomes clear. The official record is not neutral. It is a weapon. It does not only preserve memory, it dictates reality. Those who are written exist. Those who are omitted dissolve. Clara lived, breathed, shifted with something stirring beneath her ribs, but in the ledgers of state and church she was no more real than a shadow on the wall. This is the true horror. Not that a girl was born with two hearts, but that the world conspired to erase her. That men with pens and priests with books decided her existence was too dangerous to acknowledge. That the machinery of record-keeping, which we are taught to trust as history itself, was turned into an instrument of disappearance. Do not think this was only Texas, only 1867. This is a pattern older than ink itself. From the censuses of Rome to the registries of monarchs, from parish ledgers to modern databases, the same truth holds. What is recorded is preserved, and what is omitted is destroyed. Not destroyed in body, but destroyed in meaning. A man can live, breathe, love, and die, but if no ink remembers him, he is gone. And if those who control the ink decide that some truths must not survive, then history itself bends to their will. Clara's story survived not because of the church, not because of the state, but because of a fragment, one terrified midwife who dared to write 4 words in the margin of a Bible. That is all that remains. 4 words trembling with fear, yet strong enough to resist the silence of institutions. 2 hearts, 1 cradle. Those words have outlasted the priest, the census taker, the parents, the neighbors, even the house itself. They have crossed into our world, into your ears right now, and that, more than anything, proves the failure of erasure. You can silence a family, you can silence a parish, you can silence a town, but you cannot silence truth forever. It will always slip through, jagged, fragmented, dangerous, and when you hear it, you are changed. Because once you realize the records themselves are lies of omission, you will never look at history the same way again. You will see the blank spaces, you will see the missing names, you will see the shadows between the lines, and you will know the silence is not absence, the silence is the story. The cradle never stood still. That was the first thing the neighbors whispered about. Even when Clara Ara slept, even when her breath slowed to the thin thread of dreaming, the wooden cradle kept rocking, as though 2 sleepers stirred within. Sometimes it shifted gently, the way a mother might soothe a child with her foot. Other times it jolted, snapping against its own frame, as though something inside had pushed against the walls with unnatural strength. The family said nothing, but the neighbors knew. At night, if you walked the road past the house, you could hear it through the open window, not 1 cry, but 2. Faint and uneven, overlapping, like voices in a dissonant hymn. One high, sharp, infantile, the other lower, almost guttural, as if formed by a throat not meant for sound. It was never in harmony, always fractured, always wrong. And yet the mother never woke the neighbors for help. She never summoned the priest to bless the house. She let the cries ring out in the dark, hoping, perhaps, that silence outside would swallow the noise inside. But silence does not swallow, it amplifies. And in that silence, fear grew. When Clara Ara was carried into the yard, wrapped so tightly in linens that no part of her body showed, the neighbors noticed the swaddle twitch. Not the restless squirm of a baby. No, this was different. An inward writhing, a rolling beneath the skin, as though another set of muscles were turning within her. Sometimes her belly shifted in 2 directions at once, as though something pressed from both sides. The linen tightened, bulged, relaxed, a ripple under cloth. Her mother would clutch her tighter then, whispering sharp words under her breath, and no one dared ask. Children are crueler than adults. They said aloud what their parents only thought in whispers. They called her double heart. They dared each other to run to the fence when she was Kara. I'd passed. One boy claimed he saw her eyes blink out of rhythm. One just a fraction too slow, the lids moving in halves rather than whole. Another swore that when he leaned close, he heard 2 pulses. One in her wrist, one echoing deeper, behind her ribs. He told the others, and soon every child in the village pressed their ears to their own chests, wondering if perhaps they too might be harboring something unseen. Rumor fed on rumor. Some said the twin was not inside her but behind her, following her shadow, whispering into her ear. Some said it had no head, only limbs, curled inside her like roots twisting through soil. Others said it had its own eyes, and would one day push them open from beneath her skin, staring out from her stomach, as if the body were a window. And though these were only children's tales, something in them was not invention, because Clara Ara grew, but her growth was not like other children. She did not fatten evenly. One side of her chest bulged slightly higher than the other, as though a second ribcage strained beneath. Her skin darkened in patches not touched by sun. And sometimes, when her mother laid her down to rest, her breath seemed to falter, yet her body still moved, as if another rhythm beneath her ribs kept her alive. It was then the family stopped letting her be seen. The cradle was moved from the window. The linens grew thicker, binding her body until she was more bundle than child. Only the sound escaped. That second cry, that uneven breath, that shifting wood. The midwife who had delivered her never returned to the house, but people said she went pale whenever the family name was spoken. Once at market, someone asked her directly, "What did you see that night?" She shook her head, muttered only one word, 2, and dropped the fruit from her basket. She left town within the year. Do you see the pattern yet? The signs are not hidden. They are recorded in the smallest places: cradle creaks, children's rhymes, a midwife's silence. This is how the erased truth survives, not in ledgers, not in scripture, but in the whispers that cling to ordinary objects. A rocking cradle becomes testimony, a cry in the night becomes archive, a ripple beneath skin becomes scripture. But do not comfort yourself by thinking this is only folklore. There is nothing safe about it, for what the neighbors witnessed was not a ghost, not a spirit, not a superstition. It was flesh, living, moving, resisting, a second life bound within the first, pulsing with its own will. Flesh is harder to ignore than shadows. Flesh demands recognition, even when every institution works to deny it. And so the cradle rocked, and so the cries doubled, and so the silence spread. But silence cannot hold forever. There is always a moment when the hidden reveals itself, when what writhes beneath the surface breaks through. For Clara Ara, that moment was inevitable. Two hearts do not beat side by side without consequence. Two voices do not cry without seeking to be heard. And no cradle, no linen, no silence lasts forever. You must ask yourself now, what did the family fear more? The world's judgment, or the truth of what lived inside her? Which is worse, to be cast out by your neighbors, or to feel your own body become a battleground between two lives? Imagine being her mother, swaddling her every day, pressing cloth against the bees, bulges, whispering prayers not for mercy but for concealment. Imagine binding silence around something that never agreed to be silent. The rocking cradle was not just furniture, it was prophecy. It told everyone who passed that house that the silence would rupture. It told them the child was not one. It told them the parish had failed, the census had failed, the family had failed. Because you cannot erase the sound of two hearts. You cannot erase the sight of two cries. And though the house is gone, though the ledgers are blank, though the Bible has crumbled to dust, the echo of that rocking has not ended. You can feel it even now, can't you? As if somewhere behind you something wooden shifts without touch. As if something that should be still refuses to stay still. As if what was hidden in Clara Ara is still waiting, still pressing, still asking to be heard. There comes a point when swaddling is no longer enough. Children grow. They stretch against their bindings, their bones press outward, their flesh resists confinement. But Clara Ara's resistance was not hers alone. Something else strained inside her. Something that had been patient, that had accepted silence and linen for a time, but could not remain hidden forever. The first true rupture happened in the summer of her 5th year. The air was heavy that season, the kind that sticks to the skin and makes every breath thick with heat. Her mother had loosened the linens just slightly to keep her cool. It was a mistake. The neighbors said they heard it before they saw it. A sound like cloth tearing, but deeper, wetter, not linen ripping, flesh. Then came the scream. Not Clara Ara's, though her voice followed. This one was lower, rawer, the sound of a throat that had never practiced speech but had always wanted to. The two screams tangled in the air, indistinguishable, twisting together like ropes pulled tight. And then silence. When the mother carried her out later that week, Clara Ara was wrapped tighter than ever, but no one missed the blood that had dried along the edges of the cloth, or the way her mother's face had hollowed, as though she had aged 10 years in a single night. From then on, the sightings grew worse. Her skin bulged in ways that did not match bone. Sometimes her shirt lifted, and beneath it shapes pressed upward, an elbow, a jawline, the curve of something that did not belong. The movements had rhythm, but never hers. They came at wrong times, while she was still, while she was sleeping, while she sat staring at the ground. People began to say that the twin was trying to crawl free, that Clara Ara was nothing more than the shell it had been given. The priest was called at last. He entered the house one evening, clutching a wooden cross and a book already MP with sweat. He left before dawn, his robe stained, his cross split at the handle as though something had bent it. He never preached of it from the pulpit. He simply told his congregation to let the Lord's silence remain intact. But silence is not intactness. Silence is fracture, and the parishioners knew it. The rupture became undeniable when Clara Ara herself began to speak of it. She was not like other children, not talkative, not playful. But one night when her father leaned close to hush her, she whispered, "It wants to see." He asked what she meant. Her gaze did not meet his. She looked instead at the wall, the corner of the room, the empty air beside her. "It wants to see through me," she said, her voice flat, and before he could answer, she pressed her palm against her chest and added, "It has eyes, but they're inside. It wants me to open them." What do you do when a child says that? Do you scold? Do you pray? Do you believe? He did nothing, and that nothing was worse than disbelief, because the body does not stop for denial. That autumn, Clara Ara collapsed in the yard. Her body convulsed, writhing against itself. Neighbors gathered, helpless, horrified, and as she shook, her shirt tore open, not by hand, not by accident, but from within. A second mouth yawned along her side, not a wound, not a cut, a mouth. It opened wet and toothless, gasping at the air as though it had always been waiting. For a moment everyone saw it. They saw the lips twitch, the tongue quiver, the hollow where sound might form, and then Clara screamed again, not from her own throat but from both at once. Two cries overlapping, impossible to separate. The neighbors fled. The mother gathered her child, clutching her so tightly that blood smeared across her arms. They dragged her inside. The door slammed, and from that day forward, Clara Ara was never brought outside again. But a thing revealed cannot be unseen. Even after the house sealed its windows, even after no one laid eyes on her again, the story was alive. Children sang songs of the girl with the second mouth. Men at the tavern swore they could still hear her cry if they walked the road at night. Women whispered of the way the earth near the house seemed to breathe, as if the soil itself were restless. And in a way they were right, because the rupture had not ended with that sighting. The rupture had only begun. Once flesh speaks, it cannot go back to silence. Once the hidden twin takes breath, it will not surrender it. Think carefully now. What did the parish hope to erase? Why do you think no record remains of Clara beyond rumor? It is not because she did not exist. It is because she existed too much, because her body carried proof that boundaries are lies, that one life can house another, that silence can split, open into screams, that flesh itself is archive. You must understand, the second mouth was not deformity, it was testimony. It testified to all the things the church and the census and the graveyard markers wished to deny. It told the truth that could not be written. It proved that what you bury will claw its way out, that what you bind will still breathe, that what you erase will find a voice. Clara Ara was not two children nor one. She was the rupture between. And ruptures never stay contained. After the mouth appeared, the family shut the house like a tomb. Windows that once opened to the road were nailed with boards. Curtains were pinned down with iron tacks. The door was barred with not one lock but three. Smoke no longer drifted from the chimney. The neighbors pretended not to notice. They stopped knocking. They crossed themselves when they passed, quick and furtive, as though afraid their gestures might draw attention. Yet even in silence, the house did not stay still. At night it moved. The boards rattled when no wind touched them. The shutters bulged outward as though something inside pressed against them. And most unsettling of all was the sound, low at first, like a cough deep in the walls, but then rising, splitting, echoing, sometimes laughter thin and broken, sometimes weeping, but always doubled, always two voices at once. The house became unlivable, not because the family could not endure it, but because the house itself began to mirror Clara's body. The plaster cracked in uneven lines, zigzagging like veins. Moisture bled from the beams, dark stains spreading across the wood, and in the corners, knots swelled as though the timber itself had grown tumors. If you touched them, neighbors whispered, you could feel warmth. A pulse. One boy, braver than most, dared himself to creep near. He placed his ear against the wall. He swore he heard breathing. Not the slow rise and fall of slumber, but sharp, urgent inhalations, as though the house itself were gasping for air. He ran home shaking, his hair damp with sweat, though the night was cold. He never passed the road again. The land began to change as well. Grass yellowed in irregular patches, circles spreading outward from the foundation. Stray dogs avoided the yard. Birds perched on every roof but that one. And the soil, when dug, was not soil at all, but blackened, damp clay that stuck to the sow. Hovel as though it resisted being removed. It was as if the rupture had spread from Clara's flesh into the very ground beneath her, as though the unseen twin denied the outside world, sought new flesh in timber, in earth, in stone. Denied birth, it invented it. Denied voice, it taught the walls to speak. The parish responded with greater silence. No sermons mentioned the family. No prayers were offered in their name. Their house was erased from the maps the church kept. If the land was drawn at all, it was left blank, a void in the middle of the parish, and still the house stood. Still the sounds seeped. Still the rupture breathed. You see, erasure never removes. It only spreads. The neighbors knew it. Though they avoided the house, they could not avoid the memory. In dreams, they heard the cries. In fevers, they saw the second mouth. A farmer once confessed to his wife that when he kissed her cheek, he felt a twitch. Not her lips, but something else, a phantom mouth hidden beneath the skin. He woke in sweat each night, convinced that if he pressed hard enough against his chest, something beneath would press back. Children carried the memory worst of all. They made a game of it. They stood in circles and chanted, "Clara Ara, double face, one to eat and one to taste. Close your eyes, she opens two, one for me and one for you." They laughed while chanting it, but none ever spoke the rhyme at night. It was not a rhyme of play, but of transmission. They carried her story forward because their elders would not. They became the archive the parish tried to erase. Inside the house, the family's silence grew heavier. Visitors, rare as they were, reported a darkness behind the parents' eyes, as though they lived in two times at once, the present and the memory of a single summer night when silence tore. They grew gaunt, their bodies shrinking inward. Some said they refused to eat, as if unwilling to compete with whatever else fed inside their daughter. And Clara Ara, she was no longer seen, but sometimes if you walked close enough you could glimpse movement in the slats between the boards. Not a figure, not a face, just something pale sliding across the dark, too large to be a hand, too soft to be wood. Always there and gone in a blink. The house never emptied, yet it never lived. It became a wound on the parish, and wounds do not heal by erasure. They fester. They spread infection outward until what was once hidden becomes undeniable. Do you understand now why no record remains? The parish did not fear Clara Ara alone. They feared the contagion of her presence, the way her rupture infected walls, earth, and memory. To record her would be to admit her. To admit her would be to admit that silence has never been whole, that there is always another voice, another body, pressing against the frame. That is why the house stood for years, then decades, until at last it was burned. Not dismantled, not demolished, burned. Fire was the only thing they trusted to seal a rupture. But ask yourself, what does fire do? Does it erase or does it spread? Neighbors swore, the flames screamed in two voices. It was not a single decision. No proclamation was made. No priest climbed the pulpit to announce it. The burning of the house was born from whispers, from the slow accretion of fear, until one night there were no whispers left, only kindling. The neighbors gathered under a thin moon. Their faces were pale, their hands shaking. They carried torches, lanterns, oil. Some said nothing, some prayed beneath their breath. None admitted to leading. Each wanted the weight of guilt to rest on another. But together, as if pulled by one thread, they walked to the edge of the property where the house loomed. The house did not resist. That was the worst of it. It did not creak or groan or shift when the first lantern shattered against its boards. It only waited, as if it had known all along this night would come. When the fire took, it took fast. Flames swallowed the walls like a mouth too long denied food. The boards, dry from years of rot, surrendered instantly. The curtains ignited like paper. The roof fell inward, collapsing in a single gasp. And from within, something answered. Not the family. No voices cried out from upstairs. No footsteps thudded down the stairs. The parents were already gone, or perhaps already consumed. No, what answered was deeper. The fire screamed. It did not roar like ordinary flame. It shrieked. It wailed in two tones at once, the high pitch of a child and the guttural rasp of something older. Neighbors swore the flames formed shapes, mouths opening along the beams, eyes blinking in the smoke, faces layered one upon another. For a moment the second twin was everywhere, multiplied, infinite. Where silence had once concealed, fire revealed. One man swore he saw Clara Ara herself at an upstairs window. Not burning, not screaming, simply standing, her linen wrappings glowing orange in the light, a pale shape behind them shifting, pressing as though eager to leap free. He dropped his torch and fled. He never spoke again. The house collapsed in a single night, reduced to ash and ember. But even in ash, the sound lingered. Long after the fire died, when the ground cooled and the crowd dispersed, a few remained behind, listening. They swore they still heard it beneath the crackle of dying wood, the echo of breath, the sigh of two lungs where there should have been one. By morning, only a blackened foundation remained. The land was scarred, blistered as though the soil itself had burned. The parish marked the site as cursed. Children were warned never to cross it. Adults avoided it in daylight, yet their dreams led them there at night. But you know already what fire does. Fire spreads. Soon after, other houses in the parish began to whisper. Their beams cracked at odd hours, their walls pulsed with damp. Families reported laughter in their chimneys, doubled voices in their wells. Livestock were born twisted, with mouths that did not close, with throats that split. And when the villagers prayed for deliverance, their words echoed back, repeated, distorted, as though someone else beneath their voices was praying too. The parish tried to explain it as madness, as hysteria. But the truth was simpler. The rupture had never been contained in Clara Ara alone. She was only its mouthpiece. Burning her house did not end it. It only proved the second twin had found new vessels. Timber, earth, memory, fire itself. What became of the family? Some say the parents died inside the house, choosing to burn with their child rather than face what she had become. Others whisper they escaped into the woods, carrying Clara Ara deeper, where the twin could grow without witness. No record confirms either fate, but rumors persisted for decades. Hunters claimed to hear cries from the forest, two voices crying in one throat. Travelers swore of strange children glimpsed at the tree line, faces half hidden, lips moving without sound. The parish meanwhile buried the story. Maps erased the burned land. Priests called it superstition. Sermons praised silence as virtue, obedience as survival. But beneath their denial, the children kept singing the rhyme. Clara, double face, one to hide and one to chase. Burn the house, she will not go. Ashes breathe and embers grow. They sang it as they played. They whispered it when dared. They passed it along until the rhyme outlived the parish itself. The church fell to ruin. The town thinned. But the rhyme remained. The story remained. The rupture remained. Because how do you burn a voice? You can burn a house. You can burn a bow. Die. But a voice does not burn. It survives in echo, in dream, in children's games, in the soil where fire once touched. And if you stand at the edge of that blackened foundation even now, on a night when the air is still, you might hear it. Not loud, not violent, just the faintest of sounds, breath pressed against breath, lungs overlapping, waiting for silence to split again. Decades passed. The house no longer stood, but its shadow remained. The burned patch of land refused to grow anything, not grass, not weed, not thorn. Snow melted quicker there in winter, as though the soil itself exhaled warmth. Children dared one another to stand on it. Few lasted more than a moment. They said the ground vibrated, like a chest rising with hidden lungs. The parish, what little of it endured, tried to bury the memory beneath new rituals. The priests taught stricter hymns, longer silences, and sermons without question. Every pause in speech was praised as holy. Yet no one could sit through those silences without unease, for silence now trembled. Silence was never still. What the parish could not erase, the children preserved. The rhyme of Clara Ara spread beyond the burned town. Travelers carried it to villages over the hills who carried it further still. It twisted in each mouth, grew new verses, but always kept its core. Clara Ara, double-born, one was hidden, one was torn. Cut her, bind her, hide her face, still she walks in every place. Some chanted it as warning, others as play, but always the name was spoken with a shiver. Children who had never seen the blackened land whispered of a girl with two mouths. In dreams they saw her linen wrappings. In sleep they felt breath against their cheeks that did not belong to them. The parish crumbled with time. The church, once iron-backed with authority, fell to stone and moss. Families moved away. Fields were abandoned, the forest stretched inward, reclaiming the roads. Yet the story outlived the parish, and where memory faltered, silence carried it forward. Travelers centuries later spoke of a strange quiet when they passed the valley. Birds did not sing, dogs refused to enter. Even the air seemed to wait, tense as though listening. Some swore that if you walked long enough in that silence, you heard breath, not yours, not anyone's, just breath pressing against the inside of your ears, as if the silence itself had learned to inhale. Historians searching parish records found nothing, of course. The erasure had been near total. No baptismal record of Clara Ara, no census entry for her parents, no mention of a house burned. It was as though the family had never existed. Only the rhyme remained, scattered across children's mouths like seeds. And like seeds, it sprouted. One scholar traced versions of the rhyme across 4 provinces. In one, Clara Ara was said to live in wells, pulling down children who peered too long. In another, she was a warning against mirrors, look too long, and a second face would appear behind yours. In yet another, she was the patron of hidden twins, invoked to guard infants who died before baptism. The story multiplied, refracted, but at its center was always the rupture, always the mouth that should not have been. The scholar tried to dismiss it as folklore, as superstition, but then his nights filled with doubled voices. When he read aloud in his study, he swore the words echoed even when no one else was present. His manuscripts were found unfinished, his pen dropped mid-sentence. He had stopped writing, it was said, because something else was already writing beneath his hand. You see, Clara was never just a girl. She was never just a body hidden upstairs, never just a house that burned. She was the shape silence takes when it breaks. She was the truth parish walls tried to erase, that silence is never empty. It holds everything denied, everything unspoken, pressing outward, waiting for a crack, and cracks always come. That is why even now her name survives. You are reading it here, are you not? You feel it catch in your throat, the syllables too heavy for their sound. You may think this is only a story, only an echo from a forgotten parish. But ask yourself, when the room falls quiet, when you stop speaking, when your breath slows, do you not hear something faint, layered beneath your own inhale? Clara, the parish is gone, the house is ash, but silence still trembles, silence remembers, and the rupture waits, patient until you forget you are listening. Because silence has 2 faces too, one you hear and one you do not. You may think this is history, a strange tale tucked away in the folds of old Europe, or whispered from parish to parish until it rotted into folklore. You may think it is safe because it is distant, but distance is an illusion. Stories do not travel by miles, they travel by mouths, and you are reading now, you are carrying it further. This is how Clara survives, in repetition. The priests tried to cut, to bind, to silence. The neighbors tried to burn, to erase. But erasure only spreads. Ashes cling. Smoke lingers in lungs. Silence holds echoes. And now, as your eyes move across this page, the name enters you. It does not belong to parchment, or to my words, or to the vanished parish. It belongs to breath, to yours. Say it softly, not aloud, just with the movement of lips, with the smallest exhale. Clara, do you feel it? The way the name requires 2 motions of the tongue, as though doubled even in sound. The way the second syllable lingers like a shadow. You are not saying it alone. The name always carries another with it. Perhaps you notice something else too. The quiet around you has shifted. It is not absolute. No quiet ever is. There is the hum of walls, the pulse in your ear, the faint vibration of breath. But layered there, so faint you can barely tell if it is outside or inside, is a second rhythm. A breathing not yours. It may only last an instant, but once noticed, it cannot be unheard. That is her. That is how she comes back. Not as a child wrapped in linen, not as a second face pressing outward, not as a house burning in 2 voices. She returns in the moment you realize silence is not empty. When you hear the fracture beneath it, when you feel your own breath overlap with one more, The rhyme too has followed. Even if you do not know its tune, the words remain. Clara, double-born, one was hidden, one was torn. Burn the house, she will not go. Ashes breathe and embers grow. Children once sang it. Now you hum it under your breath, perhaps without meaning to. Perhaps tonight, when the lights are dim and you pass a mirror, or when you lie awake and the house seems too still, it will return. And when it does, you will not be alone in the saying. She will be there in the silence after. This is not curse nor blessing. It is simply continuation. The rupture cannot be sealed. It only changes vessel. From flesh to fire, from ash to soil, from rhyme to page, from page to you. You may ask, why you? Why now? But that question was asked in the parish too, and no answer was ever given. Clara was not chosen. She was simply there when silence broke. And now you are here. So listen closely. The silence around you trembles. It always has. Perhaps you were too distracted to notice. Perhaps you thought it was nothing. But now you know better. Silence has two faces. One belongs to you, the other waits. And so the story ends where it must. Not in the parish, not in the ash, not in the rhyme, but in the reader. Because Clara was never meant to die, she was meant to continue, and now she does, in the space between your breaths, in the pause between these words and the next.